A massive Taiwanese semiconductor investment in the US has roiled the waters in Taiwan as doubts soar about American reliability. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and I have a major update on YouTube and Apple's suppression of China Uncensored coming up later this week. Stay tuned and be sure to leave those honeypot comments and sign our petition to Apple. Link is below. So in 1980, Taiwan was in crisis. It was clear that the ruling nationalists no longer held a military or diplomatic edge over the Chinese communists. And following the US's decision to set up ties with China and sever its official links to Taiwan in 1979, there was uncertainty about American commitments to Taiwan as well. For decades, the nationalists in Taiwan had dreamt of one day reclaiming China. But at that moment, it seemed more likely that Taiwan would eventually be swallowed up by the communists. So in the early 1980s, the nationalists secretly restarted their nuclear weapons program with the aim of developing atomic capabilities that could tip the scales back in Taiwan's favor. However, with the help of a Taiwanese nuclear engineer inside the project, the US government became aware of what was going on. And by 1988, the Reagan administration was exerting such heavy pressure on the nationalists that they abandoned the nuclear venture. But while the world was spared another nuclear power, Taiwan was hurled back to its existential dilemma at square one: how to find a viable way to safeguard its sovereignty. I wonder if they tried licking everything. It was around this time that the microchip business Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, was established. It was founded with a groundbreaking new philosophy of solely focusing on manufacturing semiconductors, while leaving the design process and the selling of electronics containing microchips to others. This helped TSMC attract so many customers from across the globe that it became the world's largest semiconductor company in the 2000s. And at the end of last year, it held around a 2/3 share of the entire market. Band-Aids don't even have that big a share of the Band-Aid market. And most people don't know those things are actually called adhesive bandages, and Band-Aid is just a brand. With the modern world's strong dependence on advanced semiconductors, TSMC's know-how and vast production capabilities in Taiwan have made the island indispensable to global supply chains. As a result, it's been argued that TSMC is Taiwan's best protection against abandonment and military threats, since an attack on Taiwan would disrupt everything semiconductor for everyone. Watching democracy get crushed is one thing, but if it makes it so you have to wait an extra week to get the iPhone 37 or whatever, that's crossing the line. For that reason, the Taiwanese have called their semiconductor industry a silicon shield, while TSMC has been referred to as the magic mountain that protects the nation. Also, the silicon shield on Magic Mountain sounds like a startup item you'd get in a Zelda game. But now some are afraid that Taiwan's silicon shield has come under fire from an unlikely direction: the United States. You see, earlier this month, President Trump and the CEO of TSMC, C.C. Wei, made the surprise announcement that TSMC will invest an additional $100 billion on top of previous investments in the U.S. over the next 4 years, which will be directed towards building 5 new cutting-edge semiconductor facilities. But despite the fact that both Trump and Wei hailed the massive investment plan, the news has sparked anxiety and concern in Taiwan. Though it's a bit hard to tell, since with China's constant military drills, anxiety and concern are kind of their base emotional level. One Taiwanese lawmaker reacted to the announcement by saying that TSMC is not just a company, but an important foundation of Taiwan's international and economic security, and questioned how TSMC's roots will be able to stay in Taiwan after the construction of advanced chip fabrication facilities, packaging plants, and an R&D center in the U.S. The head of Taiwan's biggest opposition party, Eric Chu, echoed these concerns. Granted, his party, the KMT, is the most pro-China party in Taiwan and responsible for recently slashing Taiwan's defense budget. So I'm not sure how much stock I'd put into what he says is good for Taiwan's security. TSMC has tried to counter some of these reactions, with Wei stressing that most of the company's research and development will remain in Taiwan. The Taiwanese government has entered the fray as well, with the economic minister assuring that TSMC will not become American, and Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te rejecting the notion that the U.S. pressured Taiwan over the investment deal. However, the concerns surrounding the deal aren't exactly helped by the fact that the actions and rhetoric of the U.S. government are already raising questions about American intentions regarding Taiwan. For example, Trump has refused to comment on whether he would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. He doesn't want to show his hand, probably because of how many late-night hosts mocked his hands for being tiny.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
This isn't unusual for an American leader, given that the U.S. has pursued a policy of strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan for decades. But it is a change in rhetoric from the previous administration, where Biden on several occasions vowed to come to Taiwan's defense if China were to attack the island.
So are you saying that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked?
Yes, we have a commitment.
Unfortunately, that was quickly walked back by his White House. Trump has even suggested that Taiwan should pay the U.S. for its defense, even though the island already spends billions of dollars on U.S. weapons. He also said that Taiwan doesn't give the U.S. anything, and that he wouldn't feel too secure if he were Taiwan. Though to be fair, who would all that anxiety and concern? When asked whether the new investment deal could minimize the impact on the U.S. should China decide to take Taiwan, Trump responded with the following.
It's a great question, actually, but this would certainly, I can't say minimize. That would be a catastrophic event, obviously. But it will at least give us a position where we have, in this very, very important business, we would have a very big part of it in the United States. So it would have a big impact if something should happen with Taiwan.
He's also stated on several occasions that Taiwan stole the U.S.'s chip business.
With that being said, Taiwan did take all of our chip business. You know, we used to make our own chips. Now they're made in Taiwan.
Meanwhile, Trump's nominee for the post as his top Pentagon policy advisor has argued that Taiwan should spend around 10% of its GDP on defense, even though such a level of spending would be bigger than the entire Taiwanese central budget. Though to be fair, with China constantly threatening to invade, increasing the defense budget makes a whole lot more sense than the KMT slashing it. And even though the U.S.'s unorthodox attempts to end the war in Ukraine have raised doubts in Taiwan about U.S. reliability in general, this did not just begin with Trump. Afghanistan, anyone? Now you can argue that Taiwan is not Ukraine or Afghanistan, and many have. But that doesn't change that some Taiwanese people evaluate potential U.S. assistance to Taiwan based on how it conducts itself in other places around the world. For example, at the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, it quickly became clear that the U.S. wasn't going to send American troops or provide the punchy military equipment that the Ukrainians were asking for. After that, the proportion of Taiwanese people believing that the U.S. would send troops to defend Taiwan if China invades plummeted from 65% at the end of 2021 to around 36% in April 2022. While those believing the U.S. would not send troops if China invades rose from almost 29% to around 54% within the same time frame. So what does all this have to do with the TSMC investment? Well, if the deal is going to be the hit that its supporters want it to be, it matters how the Taiwanese view the U.S. And some of that has to do with the delicate and complicated industrial process that is semiconductor fabrication. These complexities have been on full display with TSMC's most recent plant expansion in Phoenix, Arizona, which began in 2021. It came in $8 billion over budget, jacking up the final cost by nearly 70%. On top of that, the start of the production had to be postponed, and there have been reports of tensions between Taiwanese and American employees. I really hope one side said, "You really need to learn how to semiconduct yourselves." At the beginning of 2025, the plant still relied on nearly 1,000 skilled TSMC workers from Taiwan in order to operate, about half of the plant's workforce. So it's not unlikely that a $100 billion expansion is going to require thousands of Taiwanese employees working in the U.S. for years if it's going to be a success. Which could mean the U.S. will be very invested in retaining that Taiwanese workforce. in making sure it doesn't become a Taipei province of China workforce. But it doesn't exactly scream success if the Taiwanese workers coming over are convinced that they are part of a mission to undermine their home's national treasure on behalf of a country that doesn't really care about them. But the investment deal hasn't actually been secured yet. An overseas investment of such a size by a Taiwanese company has to be approved by the Taiwanese government. The Taiwanese economy minister told reporters that the Taiwanese government needs to have confidence in TSMC, and that for TSMC to go into the world and have a joint venture in any location, it definitely needs government permission. President Lai weighed in too, saying that his government would review the deal with national interests in mind. But if we put aside all the troubles and rhetoric for a moment, the TSMC investment in the US can actually be a good deal where everyone stands to gain. For the US, it would bring a ton of semiconductor manufacturing capacity back to American shores, something that both Trump and Biden have wanted to see happen. Biden would be head over heels for this, and not just because he slipped again. For TSMC, it offers a way to expand its manufacturing, something that the company needs to do anyway, since its production lines are already fully booked all the way to 2027, and something that makes sense to do in the US, TSMC's largest market. For Taiwan, a deal of this magnitude could strengthen the island's relations with the US in a way that's in line with the new Trump administration's political thinking, at the price of only 5 to 7% of TSMC's production output, while still keeping most of its advanced semiconductor tech on the island. But little of that will matter if the investment deal becomes plagued by mistrust and defined by fear and threats from the onset. You don't need a book to know that's not a great way to make a deal. Probably doesn't help that Trump is reportedly still considering tariffs on Taiwanese chips despite the TSMC deal, unless that's his way of encouraging President Lai to see the deal as vital to Taiwan's national interests. But there is one side that's dead set against the TSMC deal: China. Their Taiwan Affairs Office says it's selling out Taiwan. And if they think it's a bad deal, it's probably a pretty good deal for Taiwan. Unless that's what they want us to think. Unless that's what they want us to think. Man, 40 chess is hard. Which is why you should check out this full podcast we did with an expert on Taiwan, where we go over all of Trump's plans, including the idea that Taiwan become an American state. It's wild. Click here to check it out. It's available exclusively on ChinaUncensored.tv. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.